Imagine this. You walk into a room filled with strangers. Conversations swirl like smoke in the air, laughter rises and falls like waves against unseen rocks, and smiles, those deceptive curvatures of the face, are painted like masks. Amidst the noise, your mind tries to sort signal from static. Who is pretending? Who is sincere? Who is something to hide? And more haunting still, why can some people walk into the same room and know, within seconds, exactly who to trust, who to avoid, and who secretly wants to be understood? What do they see that others don't? The ability to read someone instantly is not magic. It is pattern recognition honed by depth of thought, an intimate familiarity with human contradiction, and the ruthless discipline of observation unclouded by bias. Those we call highly intelligent, not just intellectually but emotionally and existentially, seem to move through social landscapes like skilled navigators through fog, guided by an internal compass built on centuries of philosophical understanding. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." In the context of human interaction, most people operate in this unconscious blindness, confusing politeness with kindness, confidence with wisdom, silence with passivity. But to those who've learned to see, the signs are all there. Every gesture, pause, micro-expression, and word choice is a thread in the fabric of a person's inner world. The first step to reading anyone instantly, then, is not about them. It is about you. Specifically, your ability to dismantle your own projections. You see a man who talks loudly and commands attention. Do you feel impressed or repulsed? Either reaction says more about you than him. Friedrich Nietzsche warned us, whoever fights monsters should see to it that in the process he does not become a monster. To read someone clearly, you must strip yourself of the ego's filters, the desires, wounds, and insecurities that distort your perception. A person cannot observe cleanly while still entangled in their own psychological drama. Most people walk around trapped in narratives they didn't choose. They interpret others through scripts written by early trauma, societal programming, and unresolved fears. But those who read others with piercing clarity have already descended into the underworld of their own psyche. They have, to borrow the mythic language of Joseph Campbell, slain the dragon within. Only then does the fog lift and others become legible. Viktor Frankl, in his seminal work Man's Search for Meaning, observed that the human being is not merely a bundle of instincts, but a creature driven by meaning. When someone enters your field of perception, they bring with them years of silent suffering, hopes they're too ashamed to say out loud, contradictions they can't reconcile. A smart observer doesn't just look at the person, they look through the performance and into the emotional architecture underneath. Let's take an example. A woman enters a cafe, sits alone, and glances around frequently. She checks her phone, but not in the distracted way of someone scrolling. No, her eyes return to the door every 30 seconds. Her coat is still on, her posture alert. Now pause. Most people wouldn't notice. They're too absorbed in their own world. But a sharp observer notices she is waiting for someone. Not just that, she's uncertain if they will come. There's a trace of nervousness in how she taps her cup and a flicker of disappointment that crosses her face at each failed entrance. What does that tell you? More than you'd think. She has an open heart. She still hopes. But she's been let down before, her body betrays it. And perhaps she believes she's asking for too much, even in expecting someone to show up. That sliver of human fragility contains volumes. To read others instantly is to learn how to read those volumes in seconds. It's not about being Sherlock Holmes, tallying the angle of someone's shoelaces. It's about becoming exquisitely attuned to human contradiction, the tension between what people say and what they mean, what they present and what they suppress. Aldous Huxley once remarked, "Man has to learn to deal with the fact that he is not a god, but a very faulty animal." The smart reader accepts this as a lens, not a judgment. When someone is boastful, it might not be arrogance, it might be abandonment. When someone is quiet, it might not be disinterest, it might be fear. In this realm, morality fades and meaning deepens. Before we can decode the faces and voices around us, we must confront the haunting possibility that no one is merely what they appear to be, including ourselves. The question is, are you willing to look that deeply? Are you ready to let go of surface assumptions? Because the journey to reading anyone instantly begins with this brutal, beautiful realization. Nothing about a person is random. Everything means something. And only those who've trained their minds to see beneath the waves can ever hope to navigate the ocean of human complexity. Everyone wears a mask. The tragedy isn't that people pretend, it's that they forget they're pretending. Jean-Paul Sartre called this self-deception bad faith, the refusal to accept one's own freedom and responsibility, choosing instead to become a character in a social play. A role. The good employee. The agreeable spouse. The ambitious achiever. We wear these masks so well we no longer realize they are masks. And yet, for the rare few who've sharpened their perception, the illusion is paper-thin. To read someone instantly is to spot the seam between mask and face. The mask is what people want you to see. It is the curated version of the self, stitched together by fear, expectation, and aspiration. Look at someone's Instagram feed, their carefully worded resume, the way they laugh just a little too loudly in a group, and you'll see it, the architecture of persona. But beneath that persona lies what Carl Jung referred to as the shadow, the repressed, disowned aspects of the self. Smart people read others not by judging the mask, but by understanding why it was built. Let's take a simple situation. You meet a man at a networking event. He's confident, charming, eyes flicking from person to person like he owns the space. He dominates the conversation but seems polished. Most will admire his confidence, but an astute observer pauses. His compliments are formulaic. He never asks a genuine question. He's alert, not present. You realize he's not being himself. He's being the version of himself he thinks will be most admired. A mask. The intelligent reader doesn't tear that mask off rudely. Instead, they gently probe. A question like, what do you think you'd be doing if money didn't exist? Or what's the weirdest compliment someone ever gave you? Not to catch someone off guard, but to see if their eyes shift, if their posture changes. These subtle cracks let light in. A flicker of hesitation, a softer voice, a more natural tone, there it is. A glimpse of the person underneath. Arthur Schopenhauer once said, politeness is to human nature what warmth is to wax. When you're gentle but genuine, you melt the mask. People begin to slip, not because they've been caught, but because they feel seen. And that is the paradox. To truly read people, you must give them permission to be who they are, not who they want to be seen as. It's less about interrogation and more about invitation. The emotionally intelligent don't analyze people like puzzles, they listen like poets. They see the false bravado and ask not what's wrong with him, but what has he had to survive. You'll notice the patterns. The loudest ones often fear silence. The most agreeable ones dread rejection. The overly logical ones are terrified of emotional chaos. Once you learn to look beyond behavior and ask, what pain made this necessary? You begin to see people as whole, flawed, resilient, tragic, and beautiful. Here's another scenario. A colleague at work constantly undermines others in meetings. Sarcastic remarks, subtle digs, always playing devil's advocate. At first glance, arrogant. But look deeper. He never offers vulnerability. His tone sharpens when someone shares a success. Trace it back. Perhaps he learned young that approval must be earned through intellect. Perhaps no one ever celebrated his emotional side. And now, his mask of cynicism hides a starving need for affirmation. Smart readers don't excuse toxic behavior, but they understand it. Peeling back the mask doesn't mean confronting someone with their demons. It means holding enough space for them to lower their shield voluntarily. It means using silence as a scalpel. A well-placed pause, a tilt of the head, an unexpected but sincere compliment. They can unravel years of practiced performance. Because here's the deeper truth. Most people are exhausted from pretending. They crave someone who sees beyond the social smile and says with their presence, "You don't need to perform for me." That kind of presence, non-judgmental, curious, and grounded, becomes a mirror so rare and pure that even the most guarded souls will risk being real, if only for a moment. And in that moment, you see them, fully. Not the resume, not the mask, not the noise, but the human. Reading people, then, is not about power. It's about perception. Not about domination, but about decoding the quiet signals of pain, hope, and self-protection. Because once you see the mask, you start to see the longing underneath. And the longing always tells the truth. A lie can be rehearsed, a story memorized, a tone of voice deliberately controlled. But the body betrays. It's a symphony of unconscious movements, barely perceptible flickers, half gestures, and pulses of energy communicating what words cannot. While people may say what they want you to believe, their bodies constantly broadcast what they fear, desire, or suppress. And smart readers, those attuned to this silent language, don't just hear words, they listen with their eyes. The philosopher Blaise Pascal once said, "The heart has its reasons which reason knows nothing of. But the body knows. It knows when someone is afraid but pretending to be calm. It knows when someone is hurt but trying to laugh." The intelligent observer learns to read not the performance but the trembling behind it. Let's begin with micro-expressions, those fleeting facial movements that last a fraction of a second, revealing true emotion before the conscious mind can mask it. Psychologist Paul Ekman identified 7 universal micro-expressions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, contempt, and disgust. These are not cultural. They are biological. And they leak through no matter how practiced someone is at hiding. Picture this: you ask a colleague if they're okay after a team decision didn't go their way. They smile and say, of course. But in the milliseconds before their smile, there's a flash, a tightening around the eyes, a twitch at the corner of the mouth. That's contempt. Or maybe it's sadness, flickering like a shadow on water before disappearing. Most won't catch it. But those who can read deeply? They know. The body whispers long before the voice speaks. But it's not just the face. The entire body speaks in its own grammar. Crossed arms might signal defensiveness, but paired with a relaxed jaw and open feet, it could simply mean comfort. Eye contact can be a sign of confidence or manipulation if held too long and unblinking. Intelligent readers don't isolate signals, they interpret the music of them. Because bodies don't lie, but they do speak in metaphor. Think of a person whose shoulders are always slightly hunched, head slightly lowered. Even if they speak boldly, that posture reveals a history. Perhaps chronic guilt, or shame, or simply years of trying not to take up too much space. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, himself a survivor of the Holocaust, observed that man is pushed by drives but pulled by meaning. A body caught between the two becomes a battleground of silent contradiction. There's power in noticing that contradiction. Let's return to the social setting. Someone is nodding along in agreement, but their feet are angled toward the exit. Someone says they're not upset, but their hands clench involuntarily. A friend assures you they're fine, yet their blink rate triples and their breathing shallows. These aren't just nerves. They're revelations. Truth slipping through the seams. Intelligent readers look for congruence. Does the body match the words? When it doesn't, there's a story worth reading. But here's the twist: this skill doesn't make you immune to deception. It makes you more human. Because once you start noticing how often people betray themselves through posture, tone, or micro-tension, you begin to realize something deeply humbling. Everyone is carrying something, and no one is as in control of their facade as they'd like to think. Arthur Schopenhauer once said that compassion is the basis of morality. Observing others' physical tells, not to manipulate but to understand, opens the door to deeper empathy. You begin to see not that woman is anxious, but she's trying to be brave. Not he's being aggressive, but he doesn't know how to ask for connection. Of course, some learn to weaponize body language. Politicians train themselves to project warmth with eye crinkles and gentle head tilts. Narcissists practice mimicking vulnerability to gain trust. But even then, intelligent perception wins, not because it can read minds, but because it reads patterns. True connection cannot be faked consistently. And when someone's signals are all calculated, that too is a signal. Smart readers don't look for what's being shown. They look for what's being controlled. The pause before answering. The deep inhale before denying something. The glance to the left when asked a question. These are not just quirks. They're psychic data. Markers of thought, intention, hesitation, and history. And those who study them not in a cold clinical way but in the spirit of deep noticing begin to hear the unspoken music of the human condition. So when someone says, "I'm fine," and you see their foot tapping, their jaw clenching, their smile held just a beat too long, you know better. You know the body has spoken. And you're listening. Silence unnerves most people. In a world flooded with noise, notifications, news, voices vying for attention, silence feels like a void. Something to be filled. But for those who understand the architecture of human psychology, silence is not emptiness. It is space. It is pressure. It is invitation. And it is power. Aldous Huxley once observed, after silence, that which comes nearest to expressing the inexpressible is music. But silence itself, in the hands of an astute observer, is a kind of music, a frequency tuned to the soul's most guarded truths. Intelligent readers of people understand this. Sometimes the deepest revelations happen not when you speak, but when you don't. They also understand that silence must be paired with the right questions. And most people ask the wrong ones. They ask, "What do you do? Where are you from? How's your day going?" These are harmless but meaningless. They skim the surface, reinforcing the roles people play. But smart readers? They don't want your resume, they want your rawness. They ask questions that slow the mind and stir the soul. When did you last change your mind about something important? What do you wish more people understood about you? What are you still grieving, even if it doesn't look like grief? When questions like this are asked, not interrogatively but sincerely, something alchemical happens. The mask slips. Not from force, but from relief. Most people are starved for authenticity. They're not afraid of being seen, they're afraid of being seen and then dismissed. But a well-placed silence after a deep question says, I'm staying. I can hold this. And that changes everything. Jean-Paul Sartre spoke of existential authenticity, the idea that we become more fully ourselves not by obeying social expectations, but by choosing to reveal ourselves freely to others. In the presence of someone who listens deeply, without interruption, without fixing, without flinching, we feel the impulse to speak truths we didn't even know we were holding. This is why intelligent people don't rush in to fill conversational gaps. They let silence stretch. Because in that stretch, the other person has to decide. Do I retreat? Or do I show you who I really am? It's a subtle dance. Ask something too direct, too soon, and you provoke defensiveness. But ask something just vulnerable enough, paired with real presence, and you open a door that's rarely opened. The trick is not to use questions as weapons. It's to use them as mirrors. And to do that, you must become deeply comfortable with not knowing. Let's say you're speaking with someone who seems distracted, agitated, guarded. Most would try to steer the conversation into safer, more agreeable terrain. But a smart reader might say gently, you don't seem quite here right now, what's pulling at you? Then pause. Wait. Don't rescue them from the discomfort of being seen. That pause is the echo chamber in which their inner voice begins to speak. Most people live in constant translation, converting their real feelings into socially acceptable language. But when someone senses that your attention is non-judgmental, that you won't flinch at their darkness or shrink from their depth, they stop translating. They speak from the source. And that's when truth emerges. It doesn't always look profound. Sometimes it's quiet. A tear barely blinked away. A long sigh. A pause and a simple, no one's ever asked me that before. But that's the moment. That's when you've seen past the practiced lines and into the lived reality. Viktor Frankl wrote that being human always points and is directed to something or someone other than oneself. To draw that something out in another person is an art, and silence is your canvas. Not passive silence, but charged silence. Attentive, present, compassionate. When you ask a real question and then shut up and stay, you become the rare presence in which others unfold. You become a sanctuary. And from that place, you can begin to really read someone, not just by what they say, but by how long they hesitate, how their body rearranges, how their tone shifts from scripted to sacred. This isn't manipulation. It's communion. Because the most important truths people carry are not hidden by walls. They're hidden by loneliness. They want to come out, but they need to be asked gently and then met with a silence that feels like safety. The intelligent reader doesn't force the door open. They knock. They ask. They wait. And when the soul answers, they listen. Somewhere in every person is a scar that never fully closed. It doesn't always look like trauma. Sometimes it looks like ambition or overachievement. Sometimes it hides behind perfectionism, endless humor, chronic indecision, or the inability to stay in a relationship longer than 3 months. But it's there, the core wound, the silent architect of personality. To read someone deeply, truly, is to learn how to detect that invisible fracture. Because it's that wound, not their intelligence, style, or social mask, that shapes how they navigate the world. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, "Invisible threads are the strongest ties." The core wound is one of those invisible threads, stronger than logic, stronger than desire. It tugs quietly beneath decisions, behind smiles, beneath silence. And yet, most people don't even know what theirs is. But it knows them, and smart readers know how to find it. The key is pattern recognition, noticing what someone returns to over and over, the emotions they avoid, the relationships they repeat, the narratives they can't seem to escape. Ask someone what they're afraid of, and they'll name something external: failure, loss, embarrassment. But ask, what fear do you keep proving true? And you'll strike at the deeper level. Here's how it works. Suppose you meet someone who constantly puts others first. They pride themselves on selflessness, they anticipate needs, they're endlessly reliable. On the surface, they seem emotionally generous. But dig deeper, and you may find that every act of giving is secretly a plea. Don't abandon me. They're wound, emotional neglect, likely early in life. They learned that being useful earns affection. Now picture someone who always needs to be right. Even in trivial conversations, they correct others, quote studies, play devil's advocate. It's not confidence, it's armor. A defense against the shame of ever feeling small or unseen. They're wound, possibly humiliation or chronic invalidation. The signs are everywhere if you know how to listen not just to words but to emotional energy. Carl Jung referred to these underlying forces as complexes, emotional clusters, often unconscious, that distort perception and behavior. They are magnets for repetition, and most people live inside them like rooms they don't realize they never left. To read someone's core wound, pay attention to three things. 1. Their trigger, what evokes disproportionate emotional reactions. Rejection, criticism, being ignored. The trigger often maps directly to the original wound. 2. Their armor, what do they always try to project? Strength, independence, indifference. The stronger the projection, the more fragile the self underneath. 3. Their pattern, what cycle do they repeat? Do they sabotage relationships at the same stage? Crumble under success? Choose emotionally unavailable partners? You'll find the wound by triangulating those three elements. Let's make it visceral. Imagine sitting across from someone who appears hyper-independent, won't accept help, shrinks from compliments, and always plays the caretaker. At first glance, they seem capable, admirable. But what if you gently ask, when did you first learn that being vulnerable wasn't safe? You'll likely feel it, the shift, a stillness, a pause that hangs too long, eyes that flick downward, maybe even a tremble in the voice. You've found it. You've touched the thread they didn't know was pulling them. Arthur Schopenhauer, in his often grim yet profound view of human nature, believed that suffering is the substance of life. But understanding the source of our suffering, especially in others, is not an act of pity. It's a radical act of clarity. The core wound doesn't just shape who someone becomes. It shapes what they fear, who they trust, and what they believe they're allowed to want. This knowledge, however, comes with ethical weight. To see someone's wound is to hold something sacred. It is not for exploitation, nor domination. It's for compassion, for insight, for knowing when someone is not difficult but defensive, not dramatic but displaced, not cold but conditioned to be distant, because closeness once meant pain. When you understand someone's core wound, everything else they do makes sense. The indecisiveness, fear of making the wrong move and being punished, the perfectionism, terror of being exposed as not enough, the sarcasm, a mask for the rage that never got permission to speak. These wounds aren't always dramatic. Sometimes they're quiet, the child who learned that love must be earned, the teenager who learned that silence was safer than speaking, the adult who now chooses comfort over passion, safety over selfhood. To read people is to see not just where they are, but where they were broken and how they learned to survive it. And when you can do that, not with judgment, but with presence, you don't just understand people. You hold them. There is a moment after the patterns reveal themselves, after the body speaks, after the questions open the heart, when you see someone clearly. Utterly. Not the version they want the world to accept. Not the mask they've carefully curated. But the raw, trembling, fully human essence behind it all. It is breathtaking. And it is dangerous. Because to see someone in their full vulnerability is to possess power. And how you use that power defines not just the depth of your perception, but the depth of your character. Reading people, truly reading them, is not a parlor trick. It is not a psychological chess match. It is not for manipulation, seduction, or control. It is a form of moral intelligence, an invitation not to exploit others' transparency, but to honor it, to hold it with reverence. As Carl Jung wrote, knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. Because once you understand your own patterns, your own wounds, your own masks, you stop approaching others with curiosity alone and begin approaching them with humility. Too often, people seek to understand others so they can win. Win the negotiation, win the argument, win the affection, win the control. But seeing someone clearly does not mean owning them. It means acknowledging the fragile architecture of their psyche, how pain shaped them, how history carved their emotional reflexes, how love has failed them or saved them. And then treating that knowledge like fire, powerful but not to be played with. Consider this: if you recognize someone's deep abandonment wound, you could press it to keep them dependent. If you notice a person's need for approval, you could withhold validation to keep them chasing. If you can read that someone has been conditioned to overgive, you could exploit their boundaries until they collapse. But what would that make you? To be intelligent is nothing without conscience. Insight without integrity is predation. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Hell is other people." He meant it in the sense that we are often trapped by how others perceive us. But the reverse is also true. Salvation is other people when we are seen, not judged. Held, not handled. Met, not manipulated. Those who truly read others are tasked with something sacred, to be mirrors, not magnifying glasses. To reflect, not distort. To see clearly and then choose, again and again, not to use that vision for ego, but for connection. Because real perception is not cold. It is warm. It is patient. It is protective. It knows when to speak and when to stay silent. When to ask and when to simply witness. When to name the pattern and when to let someone arrive at it themselves in their own time. To read people is not to stand above them like a god, it is to kneel beside them like a companion and say, "I see you. I see all of you. And I'm not turning away." This is moral intelligence. Not the intelligence that scores high on tests or dazzles in debate, but the kind that can hold two truths at once. This person is flawed. And this person is sacred. Viktor Frankl, who survived unimaginable suffering, wrote that the more one forgets himself by giving himself to a cause to serve or another person to love, the more human he is. Seeing someone deeply is itself an act of love. Even if you never say it aloud. Even if they never know you saw. But the greatest act of moral intelligence is not just seeing others, it is letting yourself be seen. Because the more we read others, the more we begin to sense how we ourselves are read. And in that mutual recognition, something transformative happens. You stop performing. You stop reading to outsmart. You start reading to understand. You stop speaking to convince. You start speaking to connect. You stop wearing the armor. And you invite others to do the same. In the end, reading others isn't about brilliance. It's about bravery. The bravery to look someone in the eye, read the ache they hide, the story they carry, the love they barely believe they deserve, and then choose compassion. That is what smart people know. And that is what wise people do.